Hello, book lovers. We're back for the month of November 2025. This month, it's my choice, and we are reading Albert Camus and the Exile and the Kingdom. I'm your host, Marisa Serafini, of course, always joined along, Phil Svitek. And we're really excited to talk about this book because this was one of those books where I just found myself at Barnes and Nobles and I was like perusing the shelves, not really having a clear idea of like what book to get that day. And this one came across. I was like, "Ooh, visually cool. What's this about?" And I decided, like, let's read this one. And it was so much deeper than I thought it was. We'll get all into it. But quick thoughts, Phil.
Yeah, so I think it's a great book. Now, book makes it seem like it has a beginning, middle, and end, and it does, except six times over because it's a collection of short stories. So I did not know until I read the introduction. But yeah, so it's a little bit of a different format than we've done, but that's fine because this year we kind of, if you look at it, we have been experimenting with, memoirs and nonfiction and stuff like that. So I think it bodes well. And yeah, ultimately, the short stories are very poignant and powerful, and they were a great read. Each of them has a different story to tell, and yet there's themes throughout. So it'll lead to an interesting discussion. And yeah, I liked, at least in this version that we have, obviously, it's translated because it was written in French, but also the version that we have, it is a new translation by Carol Cosman, and it has an introduction, right? Like, I like the framing going into this. I think that really helps overall. So yeah, a lot to talk about, and I enjoyed it. But what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't really knowing what to expect going into this book. And I think, like you said, we've been doing a lot of different things outside of our normal format, which I think is fun. But because us as readers, we just kind of read everything. And this kind of definitely falls into that category. And I think what I took away from this book was like the overall theme and messages of what we think is happiness, what we think is, contentment or peace, something that is defined in a lot of different ways for a lot of different people. And the interesting stories here are like kind of, for the most part, kind of pretty, I wouldn't say depressing, but it is more morose a bit, but it's very eye-opening and it makes you think in a lot of different ways that us normal, you and I, Americans would think outside of the world of what other people in different countries and different situations that they're in would think of what is happiness and peace and kingdom in that sense. I Before we start, a little bit about Albert Camus. I've never actually really heard of him, but going into his background, I was like, oh, he's a lot bigger and more known than I knew of. He's a French-Algerian journalist, playwright, novelist, and he actually won the Nobel Prize for Literature. So yet another laureate amongst our book club, and he received the 1957 for Nobel Prize for Literature. But he began his literary career as a political journalist and actor, director, playwright in his native country of Algeria. And while he was living in occupied France during World War II, he became active in the resistance from 44 to 47 and served as an editor-in-chief for the newspaper Combat. So he saw a lot of wartime in that way. But his three novels, The Stranger, The Plague, and The Fall, which were like a really good trilogy for him that like really introduced the world to his writing and his style, about like philosophical essays and stuff, and introduced the developed twin philosophical ideas, the concept of the absurd and the notion of revolt. Really quickly, the absurd can be defined as metaphysical tension or opposition that results from the presence of human consciousness. with the ever-present demand for order and meaning of life, so within that space. And the notion of revolt refers to both a path of resolved action and a state of mind. So these contrasting ideas where like something's actually happening, us knowing we should do something about it, but actually taking action to do something about it. So it's like those two conflicting dualities living with each other, and that like really opened up people's eyes. They're like, oh yeah, those are two differences, saying one thing and doing another completely different. So like he really introduced the world to philosophical ideas and stuff, and that's type of writing translated to his other books and stuff. And here enter Exile in the Kingdom. um it's about 6 short stories. We'll get into it. I think the best way to tackle this particular book is just talk about each story separately, and we'll just go from there. So, well, let's talk about and get into the first one, The Adulterous Woman. And like you said before, this was originally translated. They have French titles. I'm not going to try to pronounce them because I'm going to butcher them, and then that's bad for all of us. So, The Adulterous Woman. It's about a middle-aged woman, Janine. She's married to businessman Marcel. At first, wasn't really attracted to him, but he needed her. And 25 years, Marcel wasn't actually an ambitious law student, and he gave up his law career to run his parents' dry good business. And then with the war and all that, they made them financially, scarce, and the personal romance between their relationship naturally died. And like there was just more, it became more of a business and just like getting into everyday life and kind of stagnant in that way. And so over the years, Marcel became more obsessed with the business and tried to expand, and she just kind of became a shopkeeper's wife. And then all these years have passed. She's like, oh, what am I doing? I'm just, there's my life. We're all like, what happens? And basically they're traveling, and they get to they're in Arab merchants and stuff, and Janine comes across this one basically vendor, and she like seeing all these items and stuff. She's like, oh man, this is like maybe the kind of life I could have indulged myself in when I was younger. And one night when they were in her hotel, she sneaks along outside to this parapet, this view that's overseeing the city. And here she's like having this like philosophical idea of like, oh man, this is what romance is like. This is what happiness is like. And she kind of feels adulterous, feeling like this romantic feeling towards like the world compared to her husband. And so she's having these like conflicted emotions, like, oh man, I shouldn't be feeling like this. So that's the overall idea of this first story. Phil, what did you think of this? Just the idea of a woman kind of getting caught in her, day-to-day life with I wouldn't say failed relationship, but like a seemingly easy relationship, but not really like happy with everything that has happened in her world, and her thinking other ideas outside of what this relationship she wants.
Yeah, I think it's a nice primer for the rest of the stories. I mean, not that it was necessarily intended that way when written, but in that sense, yeah, it's an interesting question, because just by the title alone, in a sense, you're kind of waiting. All right, when's she going to cheat on the guy? Well, she's cheating on him with her thoughts, right? This idea that he's not enough, and it is out of convenience. So if there was a through line for a lot of this, it's the idea of survival, right? So she took this marriage as a means of survival, quite realistically, right? But that sort of coulda, shoulda, woulda notion comes in of, okay, well, what if I had risked it, right? Could I be happier than just this baseline of living? And, that's what she's kind of getting at. And it's a tough question to answer, right? I think it's meant to pose for all of us, whether it be a marriage, whether it be a job, whether it be, pick your poison sort of an aspect of life, we try to balance, like, okay, we know it's not perfect, but it could be like, I think that it's that middle ground for most people, right? It could be worse, it could be better, but it definitely could be worse. And so it's like, okay, shouldn't complain, right? And this story forces us to kind of contemplate all of that. At least that's my sensibility with all of it.
Yeah, I think it's, when you think about the title, adulterous woman, and you're like, oh, just a woman thinking about, maybe having a better life. It's more so just like the idea of wanting something, coveting something that she couldn't have, or she could have had at one point. And I think that's where her inner conflict lies. It's like, oh, she wanted to have more. But she shouldn't feel bad because this is, her marriage. She did marry for like a purpose, business. For both of their survival, Marcel and Janine. But I think it's that idea is like, wanting something more, but knowing that guilt and shame that you shouldn't. And therein lies the adultery in that way. And I think the writing is like, it came across a lot more romantic than I thought. For example, what makes it sound more romantic, and I'll just read a line. Then the unbearable gentleness, the water of night, began to fill Janine. Drowned, the cold rose gradually from the hidden core of her being and overflowed in wave after wave, rising up to even her mouth full of moans. The next moment, the whole sky stretched out over her, fallen on her back on the cold earth. So definitely written in a very sexually, type of way that was like she experienced ecstasy for like the first time in years, and that's what she felt was wrong. And I think Albert Camus did a great job of showing like that's something she's been missing.
Yeah,
Oh,
absolutely. No,
uh,
continue.
yeah. So that's that's the first story, the adulterous woman. So again, the idea we're always tied back to the theme of what is happiness, what is peace. Is she happy in her stagnant marriage? It doesn't seem like it. Um, and so that's the first story. Let's get into the second one, the renegade or a confused spirit. Um, this one was heavy. I think it was, I mean, quite honestly, a lot of these stories are kind of heavy, but I found this one like pretty, pretty visceral considering what we have been seeing with current world's genocides and stuff that's going on and just world wars. But the renegade of a confused spirit. It's about a dramatic soliloquy of a man who's gone mad. He's a missionary. He came out to Algeria to preach the word of God, and with the undergoing offense, and he tried to like better demonstrate to like how superior his personal God was. And he was traveling. He unfortunately comes across this certain region in Algeria, where he pretty much fell into the wrong crowd. Um, and he came across the Bedouin tribe living in this very small area. He was captured, um, and by the pagan natives there, who tortured and beat him. And then he unfortunately was imprisoned in the house of fetish of their current primitive idol, and he witnessed, unfortunately, their own various holy ceremonies conducted by their sorcerer and their like religion that they believe in. And basically he witnessed a lot of bad things that kind of just like stripped away his humanity and left him in a very feral state, to the point where they tortured, beat him, gave him a mate to pretty much rape him, and one time they tore out his tongue, and he woke up with straw in his mouth, so he literally couldn't even preach the word anymore. Like, he couldn't speak. He's just like stripped down to basically nothing. And his only means of survival, of trying, was one day he knew that another Christian missionary was going to come to the town, and he was hoping that he could escape his place, his encapsulment, kill the missionaries, and hope to spark a holy war to eventually get him out of there and just like escape during the madness. And yeah, again, pretty brutal. But what are your thoughts of just the irony of this man preaching what he believed in, became subject to someone else's religious, political ways, and then ideally sparked something that was probably completely against his will, or like completely what he believed in, a holy war, just for his own survival? Your thoughts?
Well, it's one of those aspects, right? That the ending that he's about to spark a holy war just to survive. Uh, it's like they say, you like storytelling reveals what you actually believe in because it puts you through the actions, right? Like in life, I can say one thing of like, hey, I'm a good person, I'm this, but through my actions, that will be revealed whether or not I am an overall good person, right? And so when you talk about the irony of that, I think it's much more poignant in terms of today's society, right? Like part of storytelling is to be able to relate it to yourself and whatnot. And I mean, throughout the world, right, there's a lot of Christians who say one thing but do another, right? So it's kind of that side of it. Also, there's the whole notion of like, okay, uh, how much do you push your version of the quote unquote truth or your customs, your culture onto other people, or just like live and let live, right? So there's all kinds of aspects, and yeah, I mean, I think as the title implies, or a confused mind, it did become very confusing. Like you're almost going through kind of like a weird drug trip reading it, but not a good drug trip, a very sadistic and masochistic one in an odd way. So there's a lot there for sure. And as far as, yeah, what I walk away from it is just kind of, I don't know. I don't think it's quite an eye for an eye sort of a thing. This will leave the whole world blind, but it certainly, you could see one thing begets another, you know? And I'm not saying that's good or bad. I'm just merely pointing out that's what happens.
Yeah, and I think the interesting way that the story was told, it is a soliloquy. It's about a man recounting his actions. It's like after he has gone through all the torture. And so, when emotions arise, you're not thinking clearly. So it's like, oh, but we understand the dire state that he was in, to the point of he was willing to go against his own beliefs just to save himself, to get out of the situation that he got himself in. And therefore, there's like, oh, what we would do for safety, go against our own actions and beliefs. So that one was a heavy one, not gonna lie. I had to read that one a couple times to be like, did I just did that really happen? So let's enter the third one, The Silent Men. Fortunately, not as gruesome and like visceral as the second one. The Silent Men is about the small cask manufacturing workshop, and where the men had gone out on strike for 20 days, but eventually, these men eventually had to go back to work with their tails tucked between their legs, basically just, for the usual reasons. They needed money, and Their boss refused to back down, and they needed jobs. They needed to keep living and surviving. So one by one, they just get back into their natural routines and habits of working, as if like nothing really changed, but their mentality changed, their personality towards the bosses changed, and the the boss, of course, feels bad. So he's trying to be more open and kinder to his workers, more appreciative that they're there, but the workers are just more, I don't want to say shamed, but just like um, they're kind of like the pride and ego got hurt a bit, knowing that they're still there, they're still doing their thing, they're still working. And so the communication between and the disconnect between the owner and the boss and the workers is just, there's a distance there. They're just going there doing their job, and that's it. There's no personal level connection there. But unfortunately, one day, the boss's daughter falls ill, and he has to leave. And at the end of the day, the owner returns to the workshop, and but none of the men who are talking to him can really talk to him and like provide emotional support, because that personal connection has already been severed. They're just workers. They're not friends in that way. So these men are silent, hence the silent men, that they can't speak and emote their feelings as probably as well as they could have had there not been a strike beforehand. So what are your thoughts about the men and not just being rendered to the point of silence, wanting to say something but not having the ability to do so?
Yeah, to me, the interesting factor is that there is a very close relationship overall, and I don't mean like friendship or whatever, but the fact that they can literally speak to the owner of this place, right? Um, you look at something like the Starbucks strikes, for example, happening, and that's a very disassociated version because you might have a manager at your local Starbucks, but it's not like they're not necessarily striking against that person. They're striking against the CEO and the C-suite level people of Starbucks who are very much distanced from those people, right? Um, and I say all that because in this respect, I don't know, like I'm not. There was a bit. It's mostly told through the men, but there is this side of it that the owner himself, like he in some ways wants to rectify it and wants to do good. And who knows? Maybe he's lying, but he says to them like, when there are brighter days, like you guys will be the first ones to benefit. I promise you that, sort of a thing, right? Um, so yeah, it's just this interesting kind of dichotomy. And in an odd way, I don't know, maybe this is just my reading of it, but it's very sad that if those parties can't align and come to some sort of beneficial way for everybody, then we're all kind of screwed. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think it kind of, unfortunately, like I mean, I don't want to speak for men because, like, Phil, you are a man. But there is that overall idea that men have a harder time communicating their emotions. Statistically true, but there are men that who have become more emotionally mature and are more able to communicate what they are feeling in a healthier way. And I see that the boss, he knew what happened. He did genuinely feel bad. He wanted to mend fences with um his employees, but the damage was already done. He had a lot to make up for, and it's just like that disconnect. It took him it would take him a long time to like get back to like a good state with his workers. And unfortunately, with the writing, like I do applaud Camus's writing, because I think, unfortunately, I think I'm doing a bad job of showing just how poetic his writing is. there's a line, it shows they were not sulking, that their mouths had been closed, that they had to take it or leave it, and that the anger and helplessness sometimes hurt so much that you can't even cry out. They were men after all, and they weren't going to begin smiling and simpering. um so again, it shows like the stubbornness of men not wanting to show how emotionally they were affected. um and I think that's really telling, because like this book was written years ago, and it's still, unfortunately, I feel like we're still in a position where men aren't in a healthy place to say what they're feeling. And even though I feel like we have gotten better, um, but it's just that manly sense that they have a harder time communicating their feelings. Hence, all the men are silent in this, even though we're trying to make up for happiness. Um, yeah, let's move on to the next story, The Guest. Again, the story, it kind of goes back and forth between like the political aspects of the wars that are happening in different parts of our our country, or like our world, basically. So Daru, he's a school teacher in the remote part of southern Algeria, and one day he's looking out his school room. He sees a figure approaching. It's basically the local police, Balducci, riding a horse, leading an Arab man who was on foot with his hands together, basically like a person who he just arrested. So this Balducci policeman explains that this Arab guy is under arrest for murdering his cousin in a nearby village in a argument over grain, cutting his throat like a sheep. Now the Arab who was arrested, he's docile, edgy, silent, and he announces that he's gonna leave this prisoner with Daru. He's gonna go back to his post and now leave it to Daru's responsibility to take the prisoner to the actual police headquarters, so where the Arab can stand trial for the murder that he just committed. Of course, Daru doesn't want to be involved. He's like, "How did I get roped into this?" And he allows this man to sleep in the school. But of course, he's on high alert. He's like, should I trust this man? He just killed someone. Is he going to kill me? And so throughout the whole night, he's like worried about his own safety. There's a moment where the prisoner gets up, and he was honestly just going out to go to use the bathroom and come back and stuff. But like the next day, Daru takes this man outside. He gives him food, and he basically tells him there are two directions you can go in. One, the south tract, the south direction. He can lead them to the nomads, who will give him shelter, more food, more housing and lodging, and so more safety. The other direction is to go to the police station, where he'll actually face his crimes and stand trial and all that. And Daru returns to the school, just as like, all right, I'm getting this guy off of my hands, and I'll leave the decision up to him. And he generally turns around, and he sees that this Arab man actually goes towards the direction of the police station instead of the direction of safety. And then, unfortunately, the next day, he finds on the blackboard of his school that there was a sentence written by the Algerian rebels: "You handed over our brother. You will pay for this." Basically, blaming Daru for like, you turned our brother into the police, where he actually let the Arab man choose his own fate. And at the end of this story, basically Daru's like, I did what I thought was best. I let this man decide his fate, but unfortunately, people are still blaming me, and he can't win. Either way, he's damned if he do, he's damned if he don't. What are your thoughts of this and how it all went down, and how Daru got involved, but eventually tried to get himself not involved and wash his hands clean of this man, but still ultimately involved in all this?
Yeah, I think it's like anything. There's that very famous adage of like, I'm not into politics. Well, politics is happening to you whether you're interested in it or not, right? And this is a case of that. And so you kind of, for better or worse, yeah, you can't be a bystander. You have to ultimately choose and kind of fall on your sword. Now, yes, unfortunately, most people don't want to do that, as in the case of him. But I don't know. Yeah, unfortunately, we kind of look at it as a luxury to be able to make that choice. And I will give him credit. Like, I think he tries to do what he does believe. Like, hey, listen, you choose your fate, right? Now, I don't know how that would have worked out in terms of had the prisoner chosen the other route, and would have Daru been essentially scolded for not escorting the prisoner to the prison,
Mm-hmm.
and how that would have worked out. That to me seemed a much worse sort of fate. But all the same, he tries to do what's best, but it's here's the thing. I keep saying, I'm going to correct myself because I keep saying he's trying to do his best, but he's just kind of being cowardice by not making a choice, right? Another similar sort of thing is like ignorance of the law is no excuse, right? So in this case, ignorance of political and current events, you can say what you want, but it's not an excuse. It's going to happen whether you want to or not. And so this is the situation that you find yourself in. And if you're going to choose not to act, that's in and of itself an act. And, you know, that's it. So be it.
Yeah, it's one of those things. It's like you try to keep out of a situation. Like you said, that innocent bystander. Like if I don't get involved, I won't get hurt. And that you can see Daru like shrug his responsibility. It's like, this isn't my problem. Somehow I got roped into this. I'll leave this decision up to this man and wash my hands clean of this man. And I think it's just the idea of like, oh, I didn't want to get involved, but somehow I still have to make a decision for his own safety. Um, Again, that sense of what do we do for that self-preservation. And he thought he was doing what was best for him, leaving it up to this prisoner to decide his own decision, his own fate, best for him. And I think it's just like when you're posed with an idea or like a situation, uh, pick your poison kind of deal. And he chose the easy way out, and yet people were still accusing him of turning in his own brother, his own man. You're like, well, so there's a lot of that internal conflict. Is like, I thought I was doing best for what I for my safety at the end of the day, and sure enough, he did. He survived both. Like, he survived himself. The airman, we don't know what more of his fate happened when he walked in the direction of the police station, and that's the that's the fifth story. Let's move into the last story. Oh, sorry. Actually, that's the fourth.
That was the fourth
That was the
story.
fourth.
Fourth story.
Numbers. Let's move into the fifth story. Jonas, or the artist at work. So we have this man named Gilbert. He takes up painting, and to his surprise, his work is actually very, very popular. He acquires an agent, and he successfully sells his artwork. Um, and he's married to this woman, Louise. They have like this very humble life. With the success now, they move from a smaller apartment to a bigger place. The word gets around that he's an up and coming rising artist around Paris, and he's getting a lot of fans that they're dropping by his place left and right, asking for like you know, lunches and dinners, basically, just wanting to get. He has his own paparazzi. Like, his fans are basically crowding him, and it comes to the point where his popularity has now just forced him into this world of solitude, to avoid all the fans and the socialites. He just like he stays away from everyone. He becomes more drunk, more unfaithful. He's trying to escape this professional successful life that he's somehow built for himself. He one day Gilbert constructs a flat, a high loft in his studio room to physically get away from his fans. But because now he's more detached from the world and his art, he's having a hard time just making more art. And his agents are telling him, hey, it's like, if you're not making art, you're not making money, your fans are dropping off, just like that whole business. Now, instead of something that was his passion, now it becomes his work. And Gilbert is kind of creatively, he hits a creative art block, and like us all artists do. And at one point, he finally finds his muse. He creates his last final painting in his days of isolation, and he ends up selling it off. But at the end of it, he kind of lost himself, his fans, and his love for the art. So, what are your thoughts of just the artist finding success, but it ended up not being what he wanted in the end?
Yeah, for me, I thought this was, I'm not going to say best story, but it's obviously the most relatable and most interesting, and that because of that. Um, and part of it also, too, unlike the other stories, this one takes a holistic view of this guy's life, basically, right? I mean, you don't get his childhood necessarily, but for the most part, you cover a large chunk of time because he has kids and they grow up and blah, blah, blah. And, all intents and purposes, he is a terrible person, right? Like, he doesn't care about his wife. That certainly doesn't seem to really care about his kids and yada, yada. Um, and so, yeah, as an artist, as you and I are, it's a good point of reflection of, what fuels that creativity? How do you keep that passion going? And I think all things, right? Like, it is very difficult. Similar to an athlete, right? Like, do you have a shelf life? An athlete for sure has a shelf life, right?
Mm-hmm.
But an artist doesn't necessarily. But, it's that aspect of be careful what you wish for, because as you get more famous, now, you are getting free lunches. And then it is shitty to say of like, oh, I can't go out and this and that. And it's like, why? You're being invited for free lunches. Why are you complaining, dude? And it's like, because you kind of just want to make your art, and there is that interesting point where critics start hammering him, and he's like, okay, that's good, because it'll be good to see that criticism and, try to perhaps address it, rise above it, whatever the case may be, as a form of getting back into it. But yeah, I don't know. It is interesting. And then to some degree, right, obviously Paris is just a hub of creativity and artists, right? And how many artists ultimately, I mean, he's a painter, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how many of those types of artists found fame in their lives versus once they passed away, right? So it's, look at Picasso, right? Picasso was in Paris and, he found some success, obviously, but his works are far more valued now that he's gone, right? So do I have any answers? I don't know, but it is an interesting reflection on art and the insanity it can drive within a person to create, and then what do you do when you lose it? But it also, could it in some sense be self-inflicted? I don't know. Like, to me, as I round it out, and I'll kick it to you after this, but there's that notion, like, it's hard to live life and then also, be with your friends. But I think one has to find the balance, because if you don't live, you can't really create, because you don't have anything to actually draw from. But you can't obviously overdo it. So you have to be disciplined kind of in both and find that balance and just accept that's what life is, and you're going to disappoint some people, just like he didn't want to disappoint, whoever else, whoever like asked him for any sort of money or a signature for a cause. It's like, listen, just, pick and choose what you want. Yeah, some people might be angry, but it is what it is. So that's my takeaway.
Yeah, I think just again with the overall theme of what the connection of humans and what we think is happiness, his arts essentially got him connected to people. People wanted to connect with him. More people were surrounding him. And then once he didn't want that, he severed that connection, which also severed his love for the art, his passion to drive. And then when he had this adulterous affair with this woman, who was not his wife, somehow re-sparked that artistry within him, and he promised that he'll be a better person once he makes art again to his actual wife. This is like the whole back and forth of, when I create, I'll be happy, but once that's gone, I'm not happy anymore. I think it's a vicious cycle with artists. Like we've talked about this before. It's like we see artists constantly in projects, multiple projects, or one project at a time. It's like once the major project is done and they find themselves in this hole of unhappiness and darkness, it's because they kind of lost that spark of, oh, I was working on something. What's the next thing I should work on? And therefore, like that art block. And that happens with a lot of creatives. That happens with a lot of people. It's like the loss, the finding, the losing again, and finding it again. It is a vicious cycle between art and connection, and what you think is important and what makes you happy at the end of the day. And unfortunately, this man Gilbert, he lost his art basically at the end of it. Um, but yeah, I think it's just the idea of art and what it brings to people at the end of the day. Moving into the sixth and final story, The Growing Stone. So this one I found a little bit happier. Fortunately, with all these sad and morose stories, this one kind of ended on a happier note. I feel like. So we had this French engineer. His name is Durast. He is driven like Socrates driven. He's in the jungle of Brazil, and he finds himself along this settlement along the coast. And he meets this man, and this in this Negro quarter where he's like, this man Socrates introduces him to this cook who tells him about this precious stone, that stone statue of Jesus, which is in the garden fountain in that area, where people supposedly, you can go up to the stone, chip a little bit off of the statue, keep it as relics, as good charm, and the stone eventually just regrows back. So a lot of people just come and grab a little bit, and for their own sake. And one day, this ship that the cook was on, it was sinking, and the cook made a promise to himself and prayed to the stone of Jesus, that if he survived, he would carry this 100-pound stone on his head in an actual procession in the town, that basically to, prove that he was happy that his life was spared. His self-promise to himself. And then this man Durast, staying in this area, he witnessed just like all these festivals that were going on, and basically made friends with this man and his family. And the next day, there was a whole parade, procession that was going on in the town. And this man, Socrates, we see him, he's actually living up to his word. He's carrying this 100-pound stone on his head, but of course, it's heavy. It's, he's getting tired. He's getting winded and stuff. And Duras, becoming a friend of him, helps him carry this 100-pound stone throughout the rest of the procession. And at the end, sets it down and like helps this man like see through his own promise of carrying and um, carrying the stone to show his happiness of survival. Um, what are your thoughts of this story of a man keeping a promise, doing something good, and also just like being a part of like this town's festivities, basically?
Yeah, I think what was interesting about him was that he kind of became a little bit selfless in a way, because he had gone from country to country, really building these dams, and he wanted to make a name for himself, right? And it was this idea that like years after his death, people would still remember his name for helping out, these people. And so he's doing good work, but he's doing it very selfishly. And to me, by the end, I think he will be remembered by these townspeople, but because, that paradoxical thing, because he was selfless, not because he was trying to accomplish something. And listen, obviously, I'm not saying that building the dam is not helpful, but I think obviously I don't think he would have gotten the result that he was hoping for, right? You build it, I'm sure there would be people happy, but it's not like they're going to remember the engineer if he's not ingratiated in the way that he is as it happens. So I think that's the big distinction overall.
Yeah, and I think it's the irony that this man, he's an engineer. He builds dams for a living. And what do dams do? They literally block water. And just the irony of this cook man who almost died from a flooding, from sinking, from drowning, and then he's helping this man who almost died because of water. And then again with the poetic writing of Albert Camus, I'll read a line that really sticks out with me. Duras listened without seeing anything, and the sound of waters filled him with a tumultuous happiness. With eyes closed, he joyfully acclaimed his own strength. He acclaimed once again a fresh beginning in life. Again, with the symbolism of water, water can be very, it started new. You can wash away past sins. You can start clean in that way. And just like the symbolism of water and just the idea of this man is a person who's known to stop water. And yet at the end of the story, emotionally, he was like flooded with this feeling of happiness. So again, with like actual actions, but the philosophical meanings behind things. But at the end, it was a happy story. I'm glad this book ended on a happier, lighter
They found
story.
the kingdom.
Yes.
We had exile for so long, and then we got the kingdom.
And then he found his kingdom of happiness, being flooded with good feelings. Yeah, I mean, interestingly enough, this was a deeper book than I thought it was going to. I had no idea going into this. No idea. But I think I related to the different feelings that people go through when they're feeling down, when they're emotional, the things people are willing to do to get themselves out of bad situations or just state of survival. It's that survival mode. Sometimes it gets to a point where we don't even recognize there's ourselves just to get ourselves out of situations. Overall, it's a deep philosophical book that I wish more people read because it still really hits hard, especially I feel in these days of the state of the world.
Yeah, I mean, like it's all things. I mean, he's a journalist, right? So he's writing. Like that's the irony is you're not when you write a newspaper article, you're not supposed to elaborate and what do they say, editorialize, right? They're just supposed to like state what happened. And as you keep pointing out, his writing is very poetic and things like that. So whatever he wasn't put into paper as far as his newspapers, which I've not read necessarily, but it seems like he was able to, open up the proverbial floodgates, yes, pun intended, because of the last story,
Mm-hmm.
into his fiction writing. And France is actually not a bad comparison in terms of America because France, in many ways, is a melting pot. Now, it's a slightly different melting pot, but you have a lot of people from certainly northern Africa that go to France as refuge and stuff like that. I mean, he himself was Algerian, so France has that kind of interesting cultural mix. And despite whatever country things may be taking place in within each story, I think there is that aspect of culture and being fish out of water, or sometimes being a fish in the water, and things of that nature. So there's definitely a lot there in terms of that. And yeah, I agree. I wish more people kind of did read it. There's a interesting. I think it was on Threads that I saw. I forget exactly how it was worded, but this notion of being well read, right? And there's a lot of people who would argue that they're well read, but it's like, okay, just by its definition, like there's way too many books to be considered, quote, well read. But even just on that notion, there's books from Europe, America, Asia, Africa, South America, and how many books have people read, And if you're only reading American literature, well, that doesn't make you very well read. And if you're reading American and maybe some European, like, this, and, but then that makes you a little bit more well read. And I don't know. I think I'm giving us flowers to the extent that we can. We have tried to expand the globe of literature to the extent that we can. And I think for the most part, we've hit so far every country, and we certainly will continue to. Not every country, every continent.
Yeah,
Sorry,
continent.
maybe not Antarctica. Antarctica, I don't think there's a lot of books from there. Although there is, what's his name? There was a famous explorer who left behind his boat. I have read that book. We just haven't talked about it. So I certainly have covered all the continents.
Yeah.
Needless to say, I think something like this, again, him having that, to bring it full circle, viewpoint as a journalist into this melting pot of France, I think is very well honed in through here. And by making it specific, it can become universal. So yeah, I think it's a great little book and not very thick at all.
No. I mean, I powered through this book. I read it twice, mostly because it's one, I found it an easier read, not just because it was short, but because of just the format of short stories. I found it very digestible, despite some stories being bigger bites to swallow than others. But I did like you said, the overall theme. Just because these are different people in different countries, the end of the day, we're all human. We all still feel these emotions that we can still relate to. Shame, sadness, happiness, just the need for connection, the need for survival. And I think that it's very interesting, told in, again, different situations with different people. And overall, I actually enjoyed this book. Had no idea, but I liked how it was very eye-opening, and what it makes you appreciate what people think is happiness and all of our different definitions of happiness and security. Okay. Anything else about this book before we move on?
No, that's it. I rather enjoyed it, and I'm glad we learned a little bit about different parts of the world and different cultures.
Yeah, absolutely. So this book apparently has been adapted into at least one documentary film, also titled the same, in 1993. The reception of this book varied on different individual stories. The collection often described as aspiring, reflective, and valuable addition to Camus' work. in addition to The Guest, The Adulterous Woman, and frequently highlighted standouts from Albert Camus himself. Let's talk about the other books we have been reading for fun. Phil, what have you been reading?
Unfortunately, not too much. We're actually, taping this a little bit in advance, so because of Thanksgiving and stuff like that, so haven't had too much chance to like read as many books in between the last one and today.
Oh, yeah, totally fair. And me, on the other hand, I have actually read a lot of books this month. I read a fun one called Plus One by M.J. Duncan, a sapphic romantic holiday love story about, two women pretending to be, of course, in a fake relationship, just to get back at an ex at this, family gathering and stuff. And it leads to a whirlwind romance weekend where things get deeper than you think. So, one of those fun romantic books. And then on the flip side of that, I also read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, which is a, famous book about like finances, but it's also like the mentality of just how we grew up with money is like also a reflection of how our parents grew up with money, and they pass it along to us, and it's up to us to make like those generational changes of like, this is how we relate to money, this is how they handle it. Should we change our ways because we know that's how our parents handled it, or do we change it in the way that works best for us? So it's the whole idea, instead of working for money, we make money work for us. It's very interesting. Is like just the mentality of like what you think is rich, quote unquote, what you think is success, having family, having marriage, having assets and equity and stuff like that. It's like what makes you rich at the end of the day. It depends on the person's personality. That book actually led me to The Richest Man in Babylon, which actually a bit more philosophical. I equate it, and I think I told you, I was like, I equated it to think The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. If you haven't listened to our last book story, go check that one out. But this book, The Richest Man in Babylon, also kind of like on the more metaphorical, philosophical sense of like what makes us rich, what are our actions that make us wealthy in the way that makes us produce success, and compared to the things you actually own compared to the things you want to have in life. So again, different mentalities. And then because we also did Animal Kingdom by George Orwell, that led me into Down and Out in Paris in London. Another story, George Orwell. That was actually one of his earlier books. Very interesting because it still relates to society and today and wealth. And I don't know, the last few books have all about wealth. And I think it's the funny thing is like George Orwell, he wrote this book knowing that the main audience that's going to read this book were the wealthy. So it was basically his little silent protest to the wealthy readers, like, oh, you guys are rich and this is happening for you guys, but this is happening in the poor part of Paris to these poor people, and they're struggling every day to just like get a loaf of bread while you're eating rich lavish dinners and tea every single day. And so it's like this dichotomy of a rich society knowing a poorer society yet not doing anything about it. The differences of class, financial class, and then also again still applies to today in the middle class, the poor class, and the rich. And it's very eye opening. And George Orwell, he's a genius, and I'm on a George Orwell kick. Not gonna lie, and I'd like to read more of his books, and so I am. So yeah, just a few books this past month. I don't know. I've been kind of just ingesting a lot. How about you, Phil?
Well, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times, right? Maybe someday we'll read A Tale of Two Cities.
Oh,
And I'm sure I'm sure that'll be relevant.
no, I'd rather not read Dickens, thank you. But
All good. Well, He's famous for a reason.
No, I know.
Anyway, so down the pipeline, we've got coming up Violet Thistleway is Not a Villain Anymore by Emily Kremp-Holtz. This is her debut book. It is out November 18th. So we will be reading it in December and talking about it. Looking forward to it. And more than likely, it just comes down to timing, but more than likely we will also get to do a fun interview with her as well. So
Yay.
Look forward to that. But then in January, Marisa gets to kick us off in the new year.
Yeah, I picked a fun one for us. I actually, be proud of me, I picked a book for us. We're going to be reading The Phantom Tollbooth by Norsten Jester. I hope I pronounced that correctly. I surprisingly have actually never read this book. I've heard of it. It is a famous children's adventure story. What made me want to read about it? Actually, I was editing and another author mentioned it. That was the current story that she was reading, and she was explaining like how much she was really enjoying it. I was like, oh, we love I love children adventure stories. Those are always fun. And I thought this would be a fun one for us to kick off the new year.
Okay. Then February is still TBD. After that, in March, we've got The Lost Bookshop by Evie Woods. Marisa gets to pick April. We don't have that one selected quite yet.
Not yet.
But then in May, could be very relevant for all of us, How to Solve Your Own Murder by Kristen Perrin. I have no clue what the book is about other than the title, but it seems like there's going to be someone and they're going to be solving their own murder, and that seems fun to me.
Fun. I'm in. You say murder, you say mystery and crime, I'm in.
Yes. So that's what we've got coming up. Lots of good stuff. And hey, listen, with the holidays coming up, you know what? Get somebody a book, will ya?
Please. Get them
Give
several.
the gift of reading.
Yes.
Yes.
It's the gift of reading, the gift of enjoying other people's stories and like just jumping into other worlds, because I find that fun. I find it's escapism, but it's also a great learning tool as well, into the eyes and lives of other people's stories. So that was November for this year. Exile in the Kingdom by Albert Camus. Thanks for joining us as always. Tune in to our next book, and we will see you for the month of December.